In the next panel, we're trying to break a little the conventional panel structure and have a dialogue between a scholar and an artist about the role of art in transitional justice. Our scholar here interviewing the artist will be Shriya Shenkar. She's a PhD candidate at the University of Hamburg in law and psychology. And the artist she will interview is Maya Arad Yassur, Israeli dramaturg and playwright. I'm apologizing that I'm introducing only briefly the speakers. Their fuller, longer biographies are available on our website. Please, I would like Shreya, the scholar in the pair, before she starts asking Maya, the artist, to perhaps briefly describe her own research, since this is the theme of her research. Specifically, she researched about Sri Lanka and the transitional justice processes there and the role of art and artists in that process. So, Shreya, could you very, very briefly describe transitional justice in Sri Lanka and your research and where art plays a role in all this? Please go ahead. And then
Sure, thank you so much.
to ask Maya further on the questions. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sigal. Lovely to be here today. It's this session is a slight break from our previous discussions on core transitional justice, and I'm going to be addressing how transitional justice has operated alongside art, how art has influenced transitional justice, especially in the context of Sri Lanka. My work has focused mostly on the post-conflict scenario, where we're able to look back both on art that has been produced during the conflict as well as after, in order to assess how they have formed identities, how they've crystallized political positions, and how they've managed to create a counter narrative, an alternative narrative, and archive this narrative in oral traditions, written traditions, music, dance, theater, etc. The transitional justice process in Sri Lanka include things like the lessons learned in the Reconciliation Commission that have consistently been criticized quite widely for being very top down, for excluding Tamil voices from the reconciliation process itself. In contrast, when we look at, for example, the Dayaga Padalgal, which is really the songs that were popularized by the LTTE, which was one of the core rebel groups, so to speak, or the non-state armed group in the Sri Lankan armed conflict, and then was taken over and made its own by the Tamil community at large in Sri Lanka. Now, this is really the point that I want to make before I turn to Maya and ask her about her work. Art often, like I said, contributes to a counter narrative, and at the same time can be weaponized and used as propaganda, can be used in a revolutionary manner, or has been in the past used to incite people to violence. And you really see both in this particular example of the Dayaga Padalgal. Some songs are geared towards enraging a community, asking for people to be recruited into the rebel forces, causing more bloodshed and violence, while others crystallize the Tamil identity, talk about their relationship to the Sri Lankan land itself, talk about the roots that have been laid for the Tamil identity as a whole, both within Sri Lanka as well as the diaspora as a whole. And while these songs themselves may not have featured on an international sphere, they steadily made inroads into the politics in the post-conflict scenario, where they were parts of discussions on how reconciliation needs to work, how peace building needs to work, and what role the Tamil community plays in those contexts itself. And this kind of an experience has been repeated in various other countries. Just briefly, Ladysmith Black Mambazo, which is a South African band, had a very similar role where they produced a cappella music in South Africa, and many of their themes have been cited in the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, making music and expression and art an important way to guide the reconciliation process, an important part of drawing lines on where the community stands on different issues. With that in mind, I would like to move on into Maya's work, her brilliant play, How to Remain a Humanist After a Massacre in 17 Steps. For those of you who haven't read it, please go ahead and read it. It's one of the most beautiful and moving pieces of literature that I've ever read. And I'd love to know more about it, I've divided my questions into 5 different parts or themes. And I'd like to kind of present all of them together now. And I'd like to give up the floor to Maya. First, I'd like to ask you about what circumstances led you to writing this particular book, especially in this particular play, especially in the context of the it being written in the immediate aftermath of the October 7th event. I'd like to know whether you treated it as a personal attempt to comprehend the situation around you, whether it was a broader contextual attempt. And on the same vein, I'd like to know what the challenges were, both in writing the play as well as in staging it in different parts of the world. I know it's been staged in several, and I'd like to know what your challenges were in going through that entire process. In the core of the play, I think the theme of motherhood, mothering, and being a mother is quite central. I know the kind of motive of the play is there are mothers on the other side of the wall as well. And I really want to know what the role of motherhood and being a mother is within the context of writing the play. Um, I also want to know what personal impact this play has had on you as a playwright, as a humanist, as a person living through a really turbulent time. What kind of an impact do you think it has on other people? And lastly, I would love to have you reflect on the power of theater as a means of expression in these types of circumstances. And those are my 5 themes. And I'm really excited to hear from you, Maya.
Thank you, Shreya, for your really exciting questions. I will try to answer all of them. I think I'll tell one story that will somehow address all of them, because this is pretty much covers the whole 2 years experience with the play. That was a central aspect in my experience of the whole war. In a sense, I experienced the war through the play because it kept me busy, and as I'm sitting here now, it still keeps me busy. So until October 7th, I've been always writing what you may call political plays, because I think drama has the potential to deal with conflict in really the ultimate manner, because drama is based on conflict between 2 or more people. And as a playwright, what I'm trying to do is to peel the political layers and reach the human core in every character of the play. Which means that I'm showing different perspectives, and I have to understand and I have to identify and love all my characters. Otherwise, that's what makes a dramatic play a good play. So then it's not a political play anymore, but a personal play, if you can even distinguish personal from political. So all my plays were dealing with political conflicts, with wars, with exile, with civil wars. But I always wrote it from some kind of an external point of view, from the reason I just explained. I'm looking at the situation from outside. And with the How to Remain a Humanist After a Massacre in 17 Steps, it's the first time that I wrote the least analytically I've ever written anything. It was really a very emotional response, or some kind of an attempt to recollect myself, my worldview, everything I believed in till this moment. And I always treat it more like a testimony than a play, in the sense that I understood so far writing plays. So I wrote the play 10 days after October 7th. And I just went into my study, and I told my kids, I have to write. We have to understand it was still before the ground invasion of Gaza. Sirens on an hourly basis. The children are at home, no schools, the theaters were closed. And it was too long to deal with matters that are not writing, which is the way I'm used to process realities. And I went to the room for a few hours and I wrote the whole thing in one go, which never happened before. I always tell my students that that's not possible. And then they tell me, yeah, you wrote How to Remain a Humanist. And I'm saying, yeah, I hope we're not going to experience those circumstances again. So that happens again. So I wrote the play, and now I guess I will address the question of motherhood. Because I experienced the war through my being a humanist and being a mother. This was somehow in the first days felt like a conflictual thing. You want to protect your children, but what about also protecting them? How should I put it? What kind of life am I going to give my children if I'm going to give up my humanistic views? This is a very well-educated now way of describing that. At the time, I was just writing the first prologues to recollect what happened. It's totally biographical. Even the dog is from my real life. I was just writing everything that happened. And this question, that's why the title appears in the middle of the text, because it came to me. I hardly touched it. I hardly rewrote. It came to my mind, how to remain a humanist after a massacre. And then, since there were not that many stories out at that point, all the 17 steps are things that actually came out. Gradually, stories from October 7th came out, and a certain amount of things was revealed and talked about, and all of them are in the play. I always say that today I wouldn't be able, from the amount of stories and testimonies from that day and everything that we know that happened later, it's too much to write. So in a sense, writing in that timing has had a very big advantage. I'm not sure about the advantage now. And by the way, I wrote a little bit of a very short second chapter I wrote a month ago. That
I'm really excited to read it.
Well, it's too early to talk about it because it's not published yet. It will be published in Germany before it will be published here in Israel. But basically, the title is What to Tell Your Son. It starts with the same prologue in which it's a dream of a mother, and her son breaks into her room with a rifle, threatens to kill her if she doesn't tell him. How could you just not do anything? And then it's not 17 steps, but it is a few paragraphs of why actually, what prevented us from acting? Yeah. So, as I said, the theaters were closed back then, and the journey of the play started with, for the people who didn't read the play, it's, as Shreya said, it describes the shock of the 7th of October, but it ends every step out of the 17 with the attempt to keep the notion, the knowledge that might have been cracked.
Yeah.
That what you experience now as a mother, the mothers on the other side, there are mothers on the other side of the fence too. So this was like a mantra. I was really terrified knowing how Israel responded to suicide attacks throughout the years. I was terrified of the response that I could foresee already in the first week to such a major event. And unfortunately, I was not wrong. But it's important to say that I let my closest friends, which all used to be humanists as I was, as a worldview, and people just could not read it. It was incredible to see how people read the play like looking for a symmetry all the time. Like, but you don't speak enough about our pain. That would be always the sentence. But it was so absurd because 99% of the story is our pain. And then there's only this one line in the end of every paragraph about the pain of the mothers on the other side. So for me, I always felt, am I giving enough space to the other side? But nobody could, at that point, it took some time. It was gradual when people came to me and told me, now I'm more capable of reading it. And by now it's already, how can we speak about humanism at all? Just the other day, I was asked by a German institution to present a text in some kind of a panel about anti-Semitism, and I refused because I think it's almost cynical now. I don't feel that I'm capable of talking about me being a humanist in a context of anti-Semitism. It feels, and these are the challenges that I've been experiencing with the play abroad. Because as I said, when the theaters were closed, it was presented in Germany very often. So in the beginning, everybody was very thankful for me, for opening a window for discussion about, because the theaters in Germany didn't know how to approach it in the first weeks and months. And then the play enabled them an entrance that was that was supposedly not one-sided, or was just, talking about humanism in times of dehumanization that was very extreme.
Is that perhaps the reason you have that little paragraph at the beginning of the play, kind of talking about the context in which the play was written and how you would like for it to be interpreted?
You mean on the TDR, the drama review? Yes, because I was not able anymore to discuss it with every theater. It was really presented in so many theaters in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the US, and Sweden, and all kinds of places. It was not possible to control what they do with it. I was really protective about it. I was afraid that it will be used for either for to cover, to politically used. I didn't want it to be as a fig leaf, I wanted to say, for certain ideologies. So yes, I felt the need to write it just for the general readers or anyone who considers to use the text to have that message. Then finally the theaters in Israel opened, and I chose, it was really difficult to imagine that my left-wing friends could not read it. The general public in Israel, I was really cursed online. Really bad things were thrown against me just for writing this so trivial thing. I mean, what am I writing? Of course, there are mothers on the other side of the fence. It's not something I have to prove, or so I thought. But in interviews, I would be asked, why should we be humanists? Or aren't you playing to the hands of Europeans? And questions like that. Well, I was just, writing from the depth of my soul what I was experiencing. And that was totally canceled by many people in Israel. Then they wanted to use it in one of the big subsidized theaters, and with other plays that are more like Israeli, presenting the Israeli suffering during the war and the shelter or whatever. And I had to disagree because I felt, as I said, very protective about the play. And in the end, I felt that the most suitable place was the Jaffa Theater. And the Jaffa Theater is an Arab Jewish theater where I knew the audience. And you may say, and I would like to ask you that, what's the point? It's a question we always ask as artists. What is the point of making the art trying to tell something to people who already think alike? In this case, because the humanists really found their worldview collapsing, I thought and that's why people were thankful for the play. It helped them recollect their humanism, let's say, process their own pain, and then think this is something they wanted to get a grip again. But what's the point of doing such a thing if I cannot put it on a big stage to the general public and tell them a warning? I see it as a warning in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important question, right? What is the role of art? What is the role of an artist? And in performing that art, are we aiming for massive change? Are we aiming, what is really the aim? And there's no one answer to that, but I think in my experience, it's useful to remind ourselves that art has been a way to document and create a parallel archive that far outlives the immediateness of the situation, the conflict, the event, or the scenario that it's describing. For example, you've written about the October 7th, so it was in the immediate aftermath of the October 7th massacre, but that rawness, that catharsis, I cried after while reading the play, and this was far, far after the immediate aftermath of the event itself. And I think that's what the power of art and artists really is, to create a visceral, emotional archive of and document the pain and the rawness of the ongoingness of that conflict, even when it's actually over, even when we hopefully reach a peace, have people live with dignity and with humanity. Even then, I think these instances of art serve so deeply within the community and within the international sector to humanize the way in which we see the way in which these events kind of occurred. And there are so many instances where artists have changed the course of um, a peace process or a negotiation, or have caused the escalation of a conflict. Like with these songs that I was referring to earlier, I think as they became more and more popular, there was an escalation. And we also have evidence and examples where paintings, murals, theater, plays have caused communities to come together, rebuild, um, have a civil relationship, an amicable relationship that progresses into a better dialogue. Like you originally mentioned, right? Drama is a way for a conflict to be fleshed out. That also gives people a way to see their conflicts outside of themselves, a way to analyze interpersonal dynamics, but also broader political dynamics outside of their own personal circles, of their own personal minds and emotions. And I think those are all really important in eventually creating a peaceful solution to any conflict, including this one. And thank you so much for your work. And again, for those of you who haven't read Maya's play yet, please go ahead and read it. I'm sure it'll change your worldview, at least about this.
Thank you, Shreya.
Very much to both of you. This was a spectacular dialogue, and in sharp contrast, I think, to all the analytical tools of transitional justice that we discussed in the panel before, where we try to use this very sort of structured mechanism of justice and truth commissions, and here really you play on the emotional side. And I think our first discussion exemplified how in times of active conflict where there is no acknowledgement of the wrongs, it's very hard to talk about non-criminal transitional justice, right? Because there is still no acknowledgement. So we're looking for what can provide us acknowledgement. And, the criminal justice arena, it can still be activated in that department, while, other softer forms of transitional justice have it more difficult in this context. But these are the top-down, the structural mechanisms, even within civil society. But when you talk about the artist's role and the role of art and emotion, perhaps that is one way we can still, despite the challenges, spark these emotions and the humanity of the other. And I know, Maya, you said that, even the left-wing friends, were not really there. And I think you described it so well with the clash between your maternal role and your humanistic role. And I expect that many of those who said that to you, who felt that, may be struggling in the same with the same internal dilemma, and read and reread, and possible changes can happen. They may read it differently than another time. And I think it's the mirror, right? This is the mirror. This is the mirror we all need in both societies in the region to see what, is our role in all this. But of course, the conventional tools are lacking. And I think Perhaps we need more of this art and more of this persistent also approach of showing it, talking about it, reading about it, telling about it, not folding down despite, you know, the attacks on you. So I hope also Maya from Shriya's doctoral research, you have some insights as well, and Shriya, that this enriched your research. But I also hope all these research insights will trickle down into the practice, into society, and that we can find a way to harness this emotional side, this mirror image, this personalized way, and see the victim sides of both sides, see that we are all hurting each other. You know, in African philosophy, they talk about Ubuntu. This is really a case of Ubuntu. You harm yourself, you harm the other. I am because you are. I mean, this is so coming through in your piece, Maya, and these forms of art. So I hope we can continue to discuss these points and weave them with the more traditional transitional justice discussions. Yeah, this is really important.